your journey.
What's that?
Tell them about your journey.
So, I grew up in a Christian home, and I was water baptized at age 8. I went down a devil, came up a devil. And then through a series of, life experiences, at age 19, somebody introduced me to drug trafficking at a very small level. And so I made more in 2 minutes on a break as a checker at a grocery store than I did the 20 hours part-time when I was going to college. And that changed things. When I realized I could make more money in 2 minutes than I could in 20 hours, all of a sudden everything shifted. And shift happened. And we went into overdrive. So I went from a couple of grams to ounces to pounds to kilos. The next thing you know, I'm arrested with a stolen Jetta Mercedes-Benz and a bag of cash at a private airfield in Boca Raton, Florida, where the feds came out of planes, trains, automobiles, screwed 9mm into my ears, ruined my orange juice morning. I didn't pass go. I didn't collect $200. I spent the next 19 years, 6 months, a week and a day in federal prison. I woke up in Leavenworth Penitentiary in Building 63, where the Birdman of Alcatraz actually had his birds, was in Leavenworth, Kansas, not in Alcatraz, California. And it was me and 200 cockroaches and 2 cellmates. And in response to my mother's prayers, God sent Jesus to appear in that prison cell in Building 63. And it radically changed my life and those present as well. But that's the power of a mother praying. So as we were in that cell, we were praying, they were praying, and all of a sudden the atmosphere changed dramatically. And the presence of God came in. In fact, the sounds down the hallway in a prison tier are not always the greatest sounds that you hear. And the language that's used is not always flowery, like heaven. But it was like all that was muffled out, almost muted. And there appeared the only way I could describe it is if you look at Star Trek where they teleport in.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. And here this figure is standing before us in a white robe, doesn't say anything, and all of a sudden it becomes more pronounced. And it's in my book, Jet Ride to Hell, Journey to Freedom, jetridebook.com. But what happened was, in front of 2 other prisoners, the Holy Spirit fell in a very powerful way, and I was radically transformed. And he stayed for about 15 minutes, no words were spoken, and then as he dissipated, and the love. Yeah. And so what happened is, after Jesus left, I saw this small cloud the size of a man's hand on the floor, and we've just had this encounter. I'm like, do you know Jesus? And when I did, it sparked like gold and silver, gold and platinum. And I said, Jesus. And every time I said that, gold and platinum, it filled the floor. And I later found out that this was the Shekinah glory of God. And it's really throughout 2 Chronicles 5:13 and 14, where the cloud of his presence came in the New Testament on the Mount of Transfiguration. So it's really throughout Scripture, but it took me 9 months to find it. So if somebody's listening, they're like, well, that's crazy. It's in the Bible, but it took me 9 months, so I understand. But what happened was, and this is I had sinus problems at the time, and I heard the still small voice of the Lord say, drink from the cloud. And I thought, drink from the cloud? And I thought, I've got sinus problems. So I reached down into this tangible presence of the cloud of God's presence, and I reached in, and you could feel it, and as I pulled it up, it would spring back into itself. And I couldn't drink from the cloud. It was about 18 inches in depth and thick on the floor, and my 2 co-defendants were there, and they saw this whole thing. This was not a vision that I had alone. This is 3 people saw these same things. And so I knelt down. We have to come to him. We draw near to God, he'll draw near unto us. And I knelt down into the cloud, and when I pulled it up, I drank, and I drank 3 times. It went down into my lungs and up into my sinuses. I was instantly healed. And then the prayers that we prayed, whatever was in my co-defendant's mind would come out of my mouth in English. And whatever would come into my mind would come out of his mouth. One mind, one accord. And all those prayers were systematically answered, with the exception of 2, within 48 hours. It was a glorious time. It lasted about 2 hours. Then the presence of God dissipated, and we were back to normal in that cold prison cell. And although the cockroaches had left. Anyway, so that was our encounter. So that was my experience where the Lord encountered me. People say, oh, you found Jesus in a prison cell. I'm like, no, he was never lost.
He found me.
He found me. I was the one as lost as last year's Easter egg.
He actually ended up getting tried on the same evidence in 3 different jurisdictions through a dirty prosecutor.
Well,
It's a torrid story.
the good news is that it's in the book.
Yeah.
But the good news is, years later, I was indicted 3 times on the same evidence in different jurisdictions over a period of 4 years, 11 months, and 27 days. So 3 days before the statute of limitations ran out was my 3rd and final indictment, and it was my prosecutor's final gesture before leaving office. He wrote me a personal letter on U.S. Attorney letterhead saying he was resigning not because of any of the allegations or accusations I'd made against him in federal court with holding evidence, enhancing the sentence, and all the other stuff. But we want to talk about the good side, because God takes whatever the enemy means for harm,
Right.
and he turns it for good. Genesis 50, verse 19 and 20. Joseph was in prison. Remember, just as it was told to Joseph, it shall be done, is what the Lord spoke to me in response to the Tree of Books vision. treeofbooksvision.com, you can read that whole story. So God developed character in me. I think so many times we have microwave miracles that don't produce lasting fruit.
Right.
And other times we have crock pot delays where the flavor gets through and through and characters developed, and now miracles can be
I
released.
believe that.
So this story about my prosecutor, there's a redemption side that's amazing. So we were presenting in the business world a medical device that we rep, and they asked me to come up the last 5 minutes, and I was in Independence, Missouri, where I really was arrested in Florida, then brought back to Kansas City. That's where my case was out of. Long story short, there's this guy at this table, and while I'm closing out the meeting in a business setting, the supernatural love of the Father fills me. And I see this man, and God's love for him is like raging, overwhelming. And so it got so intense as I'm closing this out. I'm looking at the guy with the love of God, and it looks familiar. I can't figure out who he is. And he finally stops the meeting. He says, "Are you looking at me that way?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I finished the meeting. I walk over, said, "It's good to see you again." He looked at me. He says, "Yeah, it's good to see you again." I'm thinking, who is this guy? Maybe somebody from my dad's church. And he says to me, "It's really too bad what happened to you." And I'm thinking, oh, he's probably praying for me. And he said to me, he goes, "Yeah," he says, "you got really," and he used a word that wasn't real Christian. I thought, my gosh, this guy's bitter about what happened to me. And he says, "Yeah," he says, the federal government really," and he used the word again. I'm like, I'm going to have to pray for him to get free from bitterness. I'm like, who is this guy? And he says to me, he says, "Yeah," he goes, I've seen you, online. He says, "You're a motivational speaker." I'm thinking, maybe he's not a Christian. I'm like, and he says, "Well, I'm on the criminal defense side now." And all of a sudden I realize this is the prosecutor.
No way.
And I'm standing with the love of God. It's like I was on a moving sidewalk, and I had a choice. We're leaky vessels. When we're filled with the love of God, we can leak out pretty quick. And this guy was in denial. He said, "How, did you get out 89, or 2000, 89? I said, "No, 2008, 2009. He knew exactly. He blocked my release the whole time. And he was like thinking, denial was a river in Egypt, and he just didn't want to accept responsibility. And every time he would say something, it would be so amazing that he was blaming someone else than himself that I almost leaked out. But I chose to remain in that love. And he says to me, he says, "You look like you haven't done a day in prison." He says, "How did you make it through 19 years, 6 months, a week, and a day and look like you've never done a day in prison?" And I called him my name. I said, I learned one thing. Prison will either make you bitter or better. And it's always our choice. And I chose not to be bitter. And he looked at me. And he kind of shrugged his shoulder. I said, "Well, it's good seeing you." So I went to go shake his hand. And the love of the Father reached around him and pulled him in. Ex-con hugging ex-prosecutor. And it lasted about 3 seconds, which is, guys hugging,
Right.
3 seconds is a long
It's an
time.
eternity.
Let alone ex-con, ex-prosecutor.
Right.
And as I let go of him, the love of the Father released into him. God fills you to release it into the world. Don't think that God fills you so that you can hold on to it. We are there to be filled with our Bible and our tea or coffee or
overflow.
whatever,
Yeah.
so that we can get filled, so we can inhale in prayer with God, so that we can go exhale in ministry to other people. And the more we inhale, the more we can exhale, and the more we have a capacity to hold His love, to go give it to a hurting, lying, dying, sighing world of destitute humanity in need of the Father's love.
Yeah.
Now, if you told me that when I was going through those 20 calendar years of prison and losing appeals and all the things that goes along with, Jet Ride to Hell, Journey to Freedom, if you'd have told me that I would be releasing the Father's love to my former prosecutor, I would have thought you had lost your mind. But you know what? Most of us really do need to lose our mind and get the mind of Christ.
Right.
The genius mind of Christ, because then you have heaven's perspective on a motion picture of God working all the scenes together for good and developing a negative into a full color photo.
Right.
Instead of a still photo. And in life, on social media and things, everything is a still photo.
Right.
But God is working things together for the motion picture. And we've got to allow Him the time to take the negative, bring it into the dark room, and develop it into the picture.
So good.
So He'll do that for you.
Yes,
Just
He
ask
will.
Him.